Hey everyone, and welcome back to Practically Zero Waste, a podcast for making zero waste living as practical as possible. Today I talk with Garret Hart, an outdoor educator at Lakefield College School, about their environmental entrepreneurship program. Say that 10 times fast. We talk tapping trees and keeping bees with a whole lot of crazy stories on the side. It's time to connect with the food we eat, so let's get to it. Garret.
Hi.
What I really want to talk about today is environmental entrepreneurship. Before we jump into all of those topics, brief summary of your role here at Lakefield College School.
Okay, my name's Garret Hart. I've been at Lakefield College for 17 years now. So I work in the outdoor education faculty. So I'm basically an instructor assistant. So if we're outside doing all the fun stuff, climbing, canoeing, camping, anything that's outside the classroom, we have a lower staff to student ratio. And so I'm the extra guy. So I go out and help teach canoeing and help teach some of those hard skills along with the classroom teacher. And then added to that, I've sort of helped develop a maple syrup program at the school. We now have an apiary, so a honeybee program, help groom the ski trails, our Nordic ski trails in the winter, drive the Zamboni on our rink, teach sailing and windsurfing, coach our snowboard racing team, and coach, sort of run the rugby program.
That's insane.
Yeah.
How do you don't have time for all of it, but you do have time. You make time for all of these incredible interests.
A lot of it's seasonal. So it's intense in the moment, and then it's these sort of chunks of 6 to 12 weeks, and then so it's like you just go from one crazy to the next crazy. It's not like all the crazies are at the same time, right?
That's fair.
So
that's true.
Interestingly, I've learned that honeybee season begins literally the day that maple season finishes. So maple trees are the first thing to bud in the forest. It's the first thing the bees go to. So the day the trees bud, we can no longer harvest sap, and then we start on honeybees. That's where we want to start.
That's where we want to start. Okay. I want to talk to you about maple syrup and honeybees here at LCS because of the involvement of the students. So they get to learn where maple syrup and where honey is coming from, and they get to take part in processing that and gathering that. I don't even know what words to use. Yeah. So start off with that. So basically,
the quick history is this place has always had maple syrup. Sugar maple and red maple, which are our two best species for maple production, are a native to this area. There's a history of it at the Grove, and some funny stories where I have this great picture with this fellow Bill Amos taken in the 40s as he was a student with two of his buddies, and they used to get put on maple syrup duty. So if you were naughty or missed chapel or didn't clean your room, while your buddies went into town on Saturday, you would go and sit with a pile of wood and an axe and a couple of buckets, and you would go and collect all the sap, and you weren't allowed to go and leave until you had they had these silver pitchers that were like a gallon pitcher, right? And that was enough to get them through the Sunday brunch.
Oh my gosh.
So you were not allowed to leave until you had the syrup for Sunday brunch. So if you worked hard, you could get it done in 8 or 10 hours, and if you screwed around, it was 2 days worth of work, sort of thing. So,
jeez, that's a big punishment.
Yeah, this is back in the good old days of boarding school. Then there's in the 80s, Bill Ambler. He was the guy who made maple syrup here, and he was talking to the boys who were here in the 80s. Quite funny, where he'd be teaching physics class or whatever it was he was teaching, and he'd all of a sudden be like, okay, so today's lesson will be Maple Syrup 101, and they would just leave the class, and he'd have them all out scattered in the woods collecting pails, and
that's great.
Instead of doing their homework, and they certainly remember that. And then when I got here, my first recollection of it was I had a big dog when I was first arrived here, and we were out for a walk in the woods, and I came through what is now the ropes course, and there was this kind of like this low haze in the ropes course and smell of smoke, so you kind of wondered if somebody had a fire going somewhere, and then there was this like really distinct maple smell, and so it was just amazing, wood smoke and maple and the whole thing. Couldn't figure out where it was coming from, so I sort of followed this back towards the back of the Colebrook houses, and there was this fellow, Ken Sunderland, who was this amazing teacher and head of house and physics teacher, 7th smartest man in Canada. That's a whole other story. And he was sitting in this lawn chair, big yellow puffy down jacket on, reading the American Association of Physicists journal and just being like enthralled. And in this little shed beside his big white Yamaha motorcycle was this evaporator that just, and this was kind of his weekend project, right? He would just gather the sap, and on the weekends he would just boil it all weekend, and then Sunday night he'd stop, and then he'd start it again the next weekend. And
wow,
he only had about 20 trees tapped, and he would just make enough for his family and to give away as gifts. And so he kind of got me sparked on the idea.
So how do you make syrup?
So the process around here is fairly easy in terms of our trees are really very much located around the ring road that goes around the school. So we do have a few pockets of trees that are off the trail, but for the most part, most of our trees are within 3 to 5 meters of the road. What we do is this time of year, when it's still cold, or just as we're starting getting to those first warm days in the spring, we go out and we tap the trees. So it's a small 7/16 inch drill bit. We drill into the tree only about 2 to 3 centimeters into the sapwood, which is the outer rings of the wood, right?
Cool.
So this is where the xylem and phloem that are in the tree are transporting water and nutrients. They're stored in and sucrose, glucose, all of the sugars in the roots. It's stored there over winter, and then now it's being drawn up into the tree to the ends of the branches to allow that energy to produce leaves and bud, right? So
that is so cool.
It's amazing, right? So the process there, it's they've studied it, and what they think is really at a sort of micro level. If you think of billions and billions of cells in a tree, when things get cold, everything contracts. And then as it warms up, it sort of expands. And that expansion creates some sort of a vacuum that then pulls this liquid up from the roots during the daytime. And then when it gets to a certain point, as it warms, it's expanding in the xylem phloem, it's being drawn up. And then as soon as it gets cold again, it stops. So it's not like a continuous flow. So what we're looking for are those days where it gets above 0 during the daytime and below 0 at night. There has to be that differential, otherwise it won't run. And our ideal is about 5 degrees, plus 5 degrees, bright, sunny, no wind during the day, minus 5 or 6 degrees cold still at night.
Yeah.
And that produces the best differential, and we get the best flow on those days. So what we're doing is we tap into the trees with a drill.
And it's only a few centimeters?
2.5, 3 centimeters max.
Oh.
So you're just going into that sapwood. You think of that as like where the veins of the tree are, and the internal structure is more like the spine of the tree.
I
right?
literally was picturing it shooting like in a big column up the center of the tree.
No, little micro tubules all around the external edge of the tree, just inside the bark. And we use a thing called a spile. So now they're a little plastic spout that has a little hole in the end, and a tube that comes out of the tree, and a little hook to hang a bucket on. Literally on a warm day, when you drill in, before you can get the drill out, the sap is like pushing out the hole.
Very sticky drill at the end of the day.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So the whole process is a bit of a sticky nightmare. But so we tap the tree, we put in this little thing called the spile, hang a bucket from it, put a lid on primarily to keep snow and rain from going in and further diluting that sap, right? That's the most part. It does keep out sort of bugs and squirrels and things like that. Keeps out little hands that like to stick in and taste the sap, but primarily it's to keep the water out. And we have about 200 taps right now.
Wow. So
on larger trees we will tap sometimes 3 on. Really, our biggest trees we'll put 3 taps in, but never more than 3.
Okay.
Commercially, they may put as many as 4 or 5 taps on a tree, but we're not trying to, make a living at this or kill the trees. So
what would kill the tree? Does it depend on the size?
Yeah. So what we're using now is called a health spile, which is this finer gauged. So if you imagine it like for yourself, think of yourself getting a needle, right? You want a fairly fine gauge needle, right? So it doesn't hurt as much.
Keep thinking of epidural.
Yeah. Right in the spine. But this is, so the 5/16, we used to use, is it 5/8? No.
Super small.
Yeah, and now, anyways, the new ones are 7/16. They're definitely small, like noticeably smaller. The reason they went to the smaller one is we still get about the same yield from the tap they found, but this hole will now close up in one growing season. So when we pull that tap in late March, early April, if you come back in October, that hole is mostly sealed up.
Okay.
Right?
Well, that's really
so that's
thoughtful.
the old ones that we used to were a bit bigger. They would take almost 2 full growing seasons.
Wow.
So we want that tree to heal up as quickly as we can. And if you go out and look at the trees around, you'll see on the maples, you'll see the old round holes from past. And then as the tree continues to expand out, those just get sort of swallowed up in the inner structure of the tree, right?
Wow.
As they get bigger and bigger.
Okay.
So we hang the buckets for the most part. We do have a couple of pipelines, which is what you'd see commercially now, which is a way of tapping into trees and drawing the sap to a central pipeline and then having one collection point.
Wow.
Rather than us having to go around to every single tree and grab a pail.
How do those not get clogged because it's full of sticky syrup?
Yep. So the sap is only 3% sugar coming out of the tree. Oh. So it is sticky, but it is not thick or viscous, right?
Like corn syrup.
No.
Or maple syrup. Sorry.
So it moves along quite well. We do want to make sure that we are cleaning the stuff at the end of the year, but there's not a problem with it getting hung up. What it will do in the pipeline is freeze. So if you have an all of a sudden a snap freeze, you got to wait for it to sort of
really
thaw out before it starts to flow again, which is a disadvantage to the lines, whereas a bucket, you've only got to thaw out that little 2 to 3 centimeter spile, right? And then it'll start flowing again. So
in that situation, could you just pop off the tubes of the pipeline and hang a bucket? Or
you could, but it's just don't bother.
I mean, for what this operation is doing, it's pretty low.
And what the commercial guys will do is they will actually have a vacuum pump on it. So they can actually now they have the technology where they can actually draw from about 1 kilometer away. So everything gets fed into a central pipeline. It's all vacuum sealed. And so at the end of the day, when the flow stops, so that differential between positive and negative, so it's gotten +5 during the day, starts to get colder and colder. When it gets to 0, literally it's like somebody has turned off the taps. So it's drip, 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 done.
Yeah.
It's done for the night. So the commercial guys at that point will have the vacuums and they will suck as much as they can out of the pipeline so that there isn't any place for it to freeze.
Right. Yeah. What amount is okay to take from a tree for it to still prosper throughout the year? Yeah.
So basically what we gauge it on is the diameter of the tree.
Okay.
So 15 inches is one tap. And then adding about 6 inches in diameter adds an additional tap.
Okay.
So, it's some of the big maples out here that are this big, like you could probably put 6-7 taps on them and it would have no discernible effect on the tree. Okay. Like giving blood, there's lots right there.
Because it's always producing more.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're not worried about that. What people will do if they're, for example, if they're going to harvest timber, like maple lumber from a woodlot, they might put 6 or 8 around smaller trees and just
suck them dry,
right? Get everything you can out of it. But we try to keep it down to 2 taps maximum, which just helps the health of the tree. So basically, collecting sap, we have pipelines. We use buckets because we have a fairly available indentured servitude force who can go and
free labor.
Yeah, free labor to go and collect for these 200 buckets
They're
until they leave for March break, and then we
right.
And then sort of myself and other staff take it on over that time. But what we do is we incorporate it into the outdoor education classes. So most of the grade 9 and 10 classes will have sort of a double period where we talk about sort of the history of maple syrup at the school. We take them outside and we actually teach them how to identify a maple tree. So through the bark, the structure of the branches, looking at often there's still leaves attached to the trees.
But for the most part, the leaves are gone. So I was thinking, you just look at the leaves, but it's winter time.
Mostly bark, mostly leaf structure. There's some lichen that tends to grow on, the yellow lichen that tends to grow on maples in this area. So there's a few sort of tip-offs. And then generally what they do is just look at all the other old holes, so they can verify that it's there.
Yeah.
So they go out, and then we tap a couple trees with them. We do most of the tapping with just the staff do it, and then they all the classes get to see sort of what happens. And so if we can get a day where it's a bit sunny, and they can go out and sort of see that as it comes out of the hole immediately after you drill it, that's kind of fun. And then we basically put them to work. So they go around and help collect in one of sort of the areas around, and then their reward is we take them down to the sugar shack and sort of explain. It's a super simple process, but it's a really neat in terms of the science behind it. So we use a gravity-fed holding tank that goes into a float control. As the sap evaporates, The float releases a small trickle of sap into the evaporating pan. The evaporating pan has a special corrugated bottom to increase surface area.
What?
We use a hydrometer to measure specific density, and we have a spectrometer to measure refracted light through it. We have a thermometer so you can tell as the sugar concentration rises, the boiling point rises, so we can measure as we're getting close to the end product. The thermometer will sort of give us the indication we're getting close, and then we can use a hydrometer to get it specifically to where we need it to be for syrup. So it's great. So you can take these kids in and they think it's just sticky sweet stuff, and we can sort of incorporate where the science is behind it. And then this year we have this whole new technology. So really generous donation from an alumni who has given us the funds to buy a reverse osmosis machine. The process is basically what we're trying to do is take this sugar from 3% in the sap to 66.6% sugar in the syrup. So it's 66%.
And then the rest is water?
It's water.
Okay.
Yeah. At 66%, it's basically inert. So it's like jam, right? Like this is why you put sugar in jam, right? Because that sugar preserves what's there. So maple syrup, if you had it in a cupboard for 100 years and took it off the shelf, as long as the bottle's clean, when you package it, like it'll still be completely preserved, right? It'll be ready to go.
Will it be crystallized?
So if it's at 66%, it's also stable as a liquid at that point. If you overboil it slightly, then that's where you'll get seed crystals form in it, and you'll get these big, chunky, square crystals in the bottom of maple syrup, which you often get if you buy, the farmer's market maple syrup and stuff like that. So that means it's just overboiled a little bit. It might be like 70%, so it's not a lot. And in the process of making it, if you just kind of miss that window or it boils a little longer than you want it to, it's not too hard to overboil it. Sometimes, if it's a little bit runny, the test for that, if you put your maple syrup in the freezer and you get ice crystals in it, then that means it's underboiled. So it's
because there's still
a little
water
bit watery.
Okay,
yeah.
That's
so
neat.
66.6% is this perfect fusion of water and sugar. It gives us that texture and that's all that sort of thing, right?
Yeah. The kids are involved in tapping the trees and kind of getting to see how the sap is processed into maple syrup.
Yeah.
Do they get to do much of that, or is that just kind of observing?
Yeah. So the idea for them is that we try to get them to actually go down, and if people are available, we'll get them to help with the through that process, loading up the hopper. Our evaporator is great. It is kind of a Cadillac of evaporator, so it has a lot of automated features that allow it to sort of self-regulate the levels in the pans and that sort of thing. Very fancy, very fancy. So we can kind of walk away from it. So if we're teaching a class, we can walk away for an hour and then come back and things are still chugging right along.
Yeah, like the little sugar shack hasn't burned down.
Exactly.
Because you walked away.
Or the fire's gone out and you just lost the boil kind of thing, right? So we're propane driven.
Okay.
Basically, this new technology that we've got, the reverse osmosis, what it does is uses a mechanical filter. So the sap is pressed into a tube that has this filter in it. Filter has a fine enough membrane in it that the sugar molecules are unable to penetrate through. So they bounce back into the stream, but water is pressed through the filter. So then the water is harvested on the outside, right? There's these guys in Quebec that have brilliant, marketers who are now selling that water, which used to be just thrown down the drain. That was just wastewater.
Look, zero waste.
You put it into a fancy bottle.
Yeah.
And you sell it
as maple water. How refreshing.
Filtered by the forests of Ontario. This is the whole story behind it, right? But basically, they take that water and then we reuse it for washing out the filter and stuff later. But what that will do is get our concentration up to as high as 50% sugar before we boil.
Okay.
So right away, you're saving time, propane, all of that. The resources way more efficient. And so we're hoping that this is sort of what we need to make us more productive. Right now, we're spending ridiculously long hours in the sugar shack, and we actually this conversation came around because I was chatting with the guy we buy our stuff from, and he was asking if we had a new evaporator yet, and I said, no. How many taps? 200. He kind of looked at me like I was crazy, and then he showed me in the catalog that the evaporator we have is rated for 25 to 50 taps.
Oh my
so
gosh.
he was joking, like, are you spending a lot of late nights in the sugar shack? I'm like, yes. So that's the idea, was rather get a bigger evaporator, which doesn't really exist in the propane world. Like, it's just,
yeah, you'd have
it's
to have
not really efficient.
Yeah.
You'd have to go wood fire, and then we're in sparks and fire and chopping wood and all that
and
sort of stuff.
students involved.
It gets a little dicey.
Lots of forms having to be signed.
Not the good old days where you could just throw them out there and make them do it. But so they're involved throughout the process. And then if a batch is ready and we can get some guys down to help bottling, then they'll do the bottling with us. It's boiled until we get to 66%, so then it goes through 2 sets of filters to take out any of the fine particulate matter that may end up in there. It comes out clear, goes into a huge old stainless steel coffee urn so that we can maintain a consistent temperature. You have to package it at a certain temperature.
Okay. What do you do with the packaged stuff? Do you guys?
We sell it at the school store.
Okay.
So the idea is that it sort of completes the loop, so that the cost of the propane and the bottles and just general maintenance stuff and all that is sort of recovered by the program. So the program shouldn't be pulling money out of other program areas. It's sort of self-reliant.
Yeah. Are they involved in the marketing and sales of that at all? Do you ever take it to the market on the weekend? Or that's
where we want to evolve to.
Right.
Right now, most of the sales happen at Regatta Day, which is our big parent day in the spring. And then Fall Fair in September or early October. And then we have students helping sell. And hopefully with their time in OE and maybe helping out a few other times, they can sort of tell the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
They know these little stories about maple syrup at Lakefield and how it's made, and they helped out, and parents are very generous and buy the case to take back to Germany or
because it's
Hong
friggin'
Kong.
delicious.
It's delicious, and it's a treat, and they hand it out and say, like, little Johnny helped make this, right? So it's kind of neat that way.
So what has that done for students in terms of valuing food?
Yeah, I think it's in particular our population of students. We have a lot of kids that have never cooked. They've never really produced anything like that. Okay. Food is something that's put on a table in front of you, and so
to see where that comes from must be a whole different story for
it's
them.
Quite bizarre. Like, they're quite taken aback. And I would say, in all honesty, we often talk about this, that our initial foray into this was really, we thought, to educate international kids about this is like the great piece of Canadiana, right?
Canada,
maple syrup. You would be absolutely shocked at the number of people, Canadian kids that literally will say, "Oh, I thought you just took your pancake to the tree, and like you pulled it and then the syrup came out of the tree," and they have such a disconnection to how it actually, the process that it goes through, and then it kind of makes sense. Like, oh, well, that's why it's $20 a liter. It's more expensive than gasoline. Like, it's okay, now I kind of get it, right? I think it's important for them to see that process, and I think where we want to evolve it to is where the kids, right now it's very staff driven and student participation. What we want it to be is student driven, right? And so the genesis of this came from Mike Arsenault, who really wanted to see the opportunity to have a environmental entrepreneurship class, is what he would call it.
Cool. I want to get into that. Tell me what that is.
So the idea is allowing kids, and this is really stolen from sort of the Montessori model.
Yeah.
So their whole idea in their middle school programming is looking at microeconomies. So the kids are involved in raising chickens and selling eggs, or
can you do that at Lakefield College School too?
That might be phase 3. So
yes. Okay.
You got maple and honey, and then maybe chickens, and then some other stuff.
Go on.
But the idea is to take things from the sort of conception stage and manage a resource appropriately. So some kid's going to come and say, well, why don't we put 45 taps on each tree and just we'll make our millions in 1 year and we're done. Right. So it's about them learning about the management, the sustainability, the management of the resource, then the harvesting of the resource, the production of the product, the packaging, the distribution.
Work that 45 taps on one tree would be.
And all this great. You've got this glut of maple of sap. What do you do with it? What if you can't process it quickly enough? Which is kind of like where we are right now, before this reverse osmosis thing came along. The genesis for environmental entrepreneurship started with the maple. We have that program. It's part of the
part
school.
Of the history of the school.
Yeah, and it's part of what we do. And it's
when did bees come in?
2 years ago, over a keg of beer in the head's residence. Mm-hmm. Again, a whole other story. I got chatting with Guy McLean, who was an interim head here for a year, and we got talking, and he sort of said, like, I don't understand, you guys have 100 acres here. I don't understand why you guys don't have bees. And I said, I have put in several proposals to have bees, and he was, well, let's do it. We're going to do it, but the deal is, this is literally the Friday before March break. And he said, the deal is the bees have to be here by June, before the kids leave. If they're not here, then you're going to pay for these bees. So you figure it out, and if you think you can make it work.
So what does that look like? What does having bees on this property and processing all the honey and everything like that?
So it was a huge learning curve, and luckily we had a young fellow who was on staff who was a nurse, and he, Dan Barnhorn was his name, amazing guy, and he had been beekeeping for a while, so he was the mentor, right? Cool. So he's basically... He created the shopping list and was like, here's what we're going to need to get going. We're going to start with 5 hives. We're going to buy this equipment and, these suits and this smoker and put it all together, and then actually went with us to get our first load of bees, which was...
terrifying, but also really exciting.
It was hilarious at a lot of levels. Again, lots of good stories, but like we almost hit a deer on the way back, and like... the hives all fell apart in the back of the U-Haul, and we had like a swarm of bees on the side of the highway at 12:30 at night. Like it was, again, it's another story, but it was just all part of the lore, it seems, with everything that goes on here. And so the first year was a huge learning process. We were doing fairly well, and we got to the point of the harvest, and Dan had left by that point. And so he kind of like got me going, and then was like, okay, pal, see ya, here's a couple books. Good luck. So anyways, I went to go do the harvest that year. I'd been a bit boastful because I thought I'd been out lifting the hives. They were incredibly heavy, packed with honey. I had tried to figure out how to use these things called a Quebec bee escape, which is a way of moving the bees away from the honey and down into the hive, and then leaving, hopefully, the honey supers which is the honey that you're going to collect, free of bees. And basically in all the videos, you just kind of drive your truck up, you pick these things up because all the bees are now down in the lower hive. What it doesn't mention is that you have to cover off the vent hole. Totally didn't do that.
Block all the exits.
Left it for 3 days. Came back with my buddy Andrew Johnson on campus, and I'd be bragging to him about, you better be careful. These things are so heavy, you're going to break your back, sort of thing. And he went and lifted the first hive. Well, we noticed a very odd sort of swarming around the tops of the hives when we got there. And we lifted the lids off and looked in, and literally it was like gang warfare. So the swarm was the honeybees were trying to figure out how to get back in to protect their honey. Yeah. What was in the hive was all the wasps, hornets, other bees, beetles, everything that had found the vent hole.
From nature. That had just
come in and were robbing the hive.
Bunch of jerks.
So in 3 days, we figure we went from 250, 300 pounds of honey to 26 pounds of honey.
Oh, it's so sad.
Was our harvest for the first year. And so we had already made this commitment that we were going to have jars of honey for all the board of trustees. And so that went from like 150 people getting like a half liter of honey to scraping the inside of the bucket to get like 150 little tiny like one piece of toast jars of.
That's amazing.
But so that program, we sort of took a year to sort of figure it out and develop it, and then last year we had the kids helping at the beginning, sort of doing, there's a whole bunch of steps that need to happen in terms of bee treatments and going out and just checking on the bees regularly and making sure the queens are doing what they need to do. They're just a fascinating, stunning species to work with. Always fascinated. I just seem to be endlessly reading about it, and you learn something new. You learn something new all the time, and also you come to realize that if you got 10 beekeepers in a room and asked them a question, they'd have 12 different answers, right? The best advice I ever got was from a fellow Dave who runs Wren Lane Honey here in Lakefield, and he said it's going to take you 5 years to figure out your bees. Yeah. You're going to lose a ton. You have some great years. Some hives are going to make more honey than you can. You won't be able to figure out why. And then after 5 years, you'll get it a flow, and you'll kind of figure it out.
I'm sure that's the same with so many of these huge endeavors like this.
With everything, right?
Yeah. So, what is the way that you extract the honey from the hives?
It's great.
And are the students pretty involved in that too?
Yeah, so this year they were like the first year they weren't. We kind of were trying to figure it out.
But
the second year, so basically what we do is we go up, and now we didn't use the bee escapes this year. We actually used fans to blow the bees out of the honey supers. So you just pull them apart and blow the bees into some grass, and then keep some supers in the bottom, and they climb back in, and you put them back on the hive. Kids came out and helped us. They had the fans were blowing the bees off.
So with big
all suited up and ready to go. And then we brought it back, and then we have a big hand cranked extractor. So the frames go in, we use a knife to cut off the wax that's capping the honey, spin them for about 5 minutes, it throws all the honey against the side, and then it's just sort of this wall of honey going down the side and then to the bottom. And in a good year, you'll collect about 100 pounds of honey per hive.
Jeez.
So they're incredibly productive. The number of trips, like 1,000 trips a day. Each bee, worker bee, foraging bee, can touch up to 1,000 flowers in one day, taking nectar and pollen from each of those flowers. And then basically they store it on their body. They have a honey stomach, and then they have these pockets for pollen. And basically they get to the point where they can barely fly. And they return to the hive, alert all the other bees, this is what I found. And then other bees will follow it back out. And they'll just go till they've depleted that resource. Wow. And then they'll go out looking for another one.
So they're producing heaps and heaps. And if we take 100 pounds of honey from a hive, do they have enough to...
Yeah. So basically what happens is you've got 2 boxes that are the colony for the hive, and you've got a queen excluder. So the working, functioning part of the hive is these 2 boxes. The way bees work is once they get too tight in space, they swarm. And that's their natural way of redistribution. So the queen senses there's not enough space left. She stops eating for a while, so she slims down a little bit so she can fly, and then she stops laying eggs, and then she just takes 50% of the bees with her and leaves. The remaining bees will sense that she's gone because the pheromone that she produces is no longer available, and they don't sense it, and then they will actually go through the process of creating a new queen cell or multiple queen cells and rearing a new queen. That queen then goes off and goes out looking for a new space to start a new hive. Basically, what we're constantly doing in beekeeping is trying to give them just enough space that they feel like they're productive and they're filling up space and they've got room. But you don't want to give them too much space because they like kind of that a bit of a cloistered environment, right?
Okay. So
yin and yang of trying to figure out, like, don't give them too much space, but also like don't let them get too full and start to leave.
Right. So you're always removing some throughout the whole season.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can do it that way, or people just add another box. Just keep adding boxes, adding boxes. Generally, especially the commercial guys will try to do one big harvest at the end because it's a sticky, gooey mess.
Yeah.
So you don't want to necessarily be...
Yeah, you guys are like into the sticky products
it's
that you
all,
can make.
sweet, sugary craziness.
That's Lakefield for you.
But the nice thing is, like I said earlier, the maple syrup is a really intense 6 or 8 weeks. Like you're on, and it's late nights and the whole thing. And it literally finishes as the trees start to go to bud, the sap changes, and we can no longer harvest the sap anymore.
What changes about it?
The chemical composition will change it because now when the trees bud, they want more of the minerals to help actually produce the leaf.
Okay.
Right? Like once the bud is formed, now the leaves need to grow.
Yeah.
And so what happens, the sap goes from this beautiful clear color to like a bright yellow. It looks like urine. It looks like somebody's peed in the buckets.
Great.
At that point, we pour the bucket out, pull the spile out, and that tap is done.
Wow.
And it might take a week and a half or 2 weeks till all of them start to change. Right. But once that happens, we're done.
And then the bee season is right after that.
And then the bee season literally starts the next day. But the nice thing for that is that it's probably about the same amount of work. Rather than 6 or 8 weeks, it's spread from April till October.
Oh, wow.
So it's like you go to see the bees once a week and just make sure, look in a couple of hives, make sure everything's sort of working, make sure there's no problems.
No students are here during
the summer. Yeah.
So that's just July and August?
That's me. So I sort of covered off then. But they get to be here at the beginning time when we're doing
all the prep stuff.
Prep and what we call splits. So we're actually taking that hive and we're artificially creating a swarm. So they can be here to help us sort of with that process. The summer is just the gathering and collecting. Yeah. At the end, with the harvest, the kids are back so that they can help with
that's the best part.
The collecting and all that sort of stuff. Now we're starting to stockpile like beeswax. So now we're going to have a staff and hopefully a student like Sunday afternoon, like come and make lip balm and some beeswax candles and stuff like that with the beeswax from our hives. Yeah, that's
so great. So that they get to see what to do with the quote unquote waste of making honey. You get to use the beeswax.
The byproducts, so I'll get like 100% of
the
it.
Maple water.
Yeah,
you could sell that in your fancy gift shop.
Yeah, like all of that sort of stuff. Like I think it's about the marketing. It's obviously there's a business angle to all of it, but it's also resource management, right?
So the students that are participating in these programs, is there a push for for the whole school to be more aware of food waste and issues around the environment, now that they know how much work goes into creating these products for something that's so simple and so everyday to us as honey or maple syrup, maybe in Canada it's really everyday, is there a greater emphasis on don't throw out that leftover bit of stuff?
We have a program at the school called LEAF, so Lakefield Environmental Action Force.
Cool.
And so that's a school-based, like student-based, staff-supported club at the school. There's always a core group of kids that realize that they're pretty lucky in what they get here, and there is, there can be a little bit of excess at times, and then they're the ones that sort of bring some of these ideas to the forefront. So when we get around Earth Day, we will have things like 100-mile meals and looking at food waste and trying to sort of bring some of that awareness to the student body.
Is there any sort of composting that happens?
So there's a huge composter.
Tell me about composting here.
So we have an industrial-sized composter. So all of the food waste from the dining hall is composted. Originally, the main intent was to reduce
the garbage
that's
going out.
The waste, because we pay by the pound or by mass. When you're paying that, anything you can do to divert that, right?
Yeah, I feel like everywhere should have to pay for garbage.
Well, it's coming. It's starting to come, right? Like and composting.
Not to make it inaccessible. Whatever. I know that not everyone can afford to have their garbage picked up if it's expensive, and not everyone can compost because they live in an apartment or whatever. But
I think municipally, and it's certainly institutionally, like there's a huge push for people to be able to compost. Where we haven't quite closed the loop on it is, we do compost.
What do you do with it?
And then what do we do with it? Where does it go? And that's it.
Sell it.
And that this composter that we have is a huge cylindrical stainless contraption that like rotates and heats and allows it. So it sort of gets to half or 2/3 of the way to like usable compost. Yeah. So it actually has to go out and be like dried and turned and stuff like that. And we're not there yet. Yeah. Right? So it's
totally fair.
It basically goes out and it goes into our green waste dump. Yeah. And the hope is that at some point we can finish it properly and then use it in gardens as a mulch and stuff like that.
Can I come in the springtime and get some compost for my garden?
If you tell them, they will give you as much as you want.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited.
But it's like, it is the sort of thing where like I will get it for my garden, and I get it 2 or 3 big bags of it in the late fall and dig it in because it smells terrible. Like it's not properly,
compost isn't pretty.
Yet. But by the time you get to planting in May, like it's there and it's good to go.
Amazing.
Yeah. So, and again, like the impetus for that was really cost reduction in waste removal. Yeah. But I mean, tons of side benefits as we sort of move to it. I could see if we spawn this environmental entrepreneurship program, like that could be part of it, right? You could have maple, you could have honey, you could look at chickens, you could look at selling bagged compost. You could look at, one of the other things we're talking about is goats, because goats eat poison ivy, right?
What?
And we were at a school.
And that doesn't bother them?
Nope, we were at a school.
Goats are weird and amazing.
The Hershey Montessori School outside Cleveland, where they have a program for kids that are need a little bit of downtime away from everybody else. Yeah. They go and walk the goats.
Goat
and they just
therapy.
Have them walk down the trail, herd these goats, and they take this big red sign and they go as far as they can, and when they're done, they put the sign in, and then next time you know where to start.
That's amazing.
The goats go 2 or 3 feet on either side of the trail, and they eat all the poison ivy. Wow. And they can process it somehow, right? And they just keep doing that, and they said, it's taken 2 or 3 years, but all of a sudden at that point, like the noticeably less poison ivy, and trails more usable, and all that sort of thing, right?
It's all so clever, and it just makes so much sense to let nature run nature and not have so much human interference, and it's just so great. I know that we have to be here on this planet. We're already here, so we might as well enjoy it, but like, let's not do too much damage, people. This is great.
Along the way.
Oh man. So is there a way that the community can get involved and offer support for this program? And maybe how would you recommend other high schools kind of start programs that are similar?
The interesting thing is that we've already gotten a couple calls. The bee community, a really open and embracing sort of community, right? So as soon as people found out that we were doing it here, tons of support. And then I've actually got 2 or 3 other people at high schools that have now contacted me saying, like, how did you do it? How's it working? How'd you get around administration? How'd you get around people being afraid of the bees? Like
signing all those forms.
How'd you figure this all out? And so it's great. It started some conversations along those lines. I think that we're at the stage where we're on the verge of being able to roll some of this out to the broader Lakefield and Peterborough community. Cool. But right now it's pretty much an in-house thing, right? It's as we sort of figure out where we're going with it.
And it's the staff time too, like how much stuff.
Yeah. So like
your list at the beginning of the 10,000 things you do. Like this is just one of them.
This, as often happens at independent schools, stuff starts out of somebody's passion.
Yeah.
Whether it's your Nordic ski program or your climbing program or your kayaking program or windsurfing, is because you've got a couple of staff that this is their thing, and they want to share that with students that are there. So this was my thing, my maple syrup and honey. And so the hope is that if we can sort of get this embedded more from a program point of view, that this will be something, like when I retire, that it doesn't just fade because I'm gone. Yeah, because
they don't have someone to do all that work.
So that's all in sort of the mix right now as we sort of figure out and go forward.
Good luck with everything.
Yeah,
and I will be back in a couple weeks to tap trees and go around and collect buckets with you. And I'll be back in the springtime again to get my compost.
You come and see the bees, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a fun one too. I think I read this great book written by this woman, Sue Hubble, and it's called A Year with Bees. And she's in the Ozarks. Her quote is that when you take somebody to see the bees for the first time, you take a lawn chair, a beer, and a shot of scotch. And the idea is that when you get them out there, you sit them down in the chair for 10 or 15 minutes while they drink their beer. So they can just calm down and just watch and not be all excited and like, this is so amazing. Just kind of, calm down.
Chill out.
And the bees will sense it. It sounds really hokey, but it's true. And then when they're sort of nice and calm, then you give them the scotch so that they're really calm. And then you start the process, right? And then you go and you show them and show them what needs to be done.
So what do you do with the students?
We just get them out there and smile a lot and take a lot of pictures and get all like the great pictures when you can put some honey on a student's finger and they can actually they can sit with a bee that far away from them. Like they got a glove on, but they can watch like the tongue come out and them harvesting the service.
Connection with nature is missing in so many people's lives.
Yeah.
Like to be able to offer a day when people in the community could come in and like adults could experience bees for the first time if they wanted to. You could offer a workshop. I don't know. I'm just throwing all these ideas to add more work to your life. Yeah.
Again, sort of in-house, we offer a parents. It's called Through the Red Doors.
Yeah.
So it's a day where parents can come in and like take a physics class, do a math class, do a OE class, and we'll take them out to the bees. If we've done it before when maple syrup's on, I'll take them down to the sugar shack or that sort of thing. So we offer, again, it's right now it's at an in-house level, but there are tons of resources out in the community and tons of groups that will gladly take people in to see beekeeping.
Cool.
So, we kind of push people down to we are some big suppliers, Dancing Bee and Sutherland Co-op. And both of them offer courses all the time for people that want to
connect with the real world.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the real world.
Yeah.
This is nature. This is the real world.
And it's a lot of fun too.
Yeah.
Right?
That's wonderful. Cool. That's all I got.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. I will.
Thank you so much. Thanks again for listening, everyone. Lakefield College School is a private high school in Lakefield, Ontario. If you'd like to learn more, you can head over to their website, lcs.on.ca, or find them on social media at LakefieldCS. And you can find me on Instagram at ElspethCallahan. If you'd like to contact the show, you can leave a comment on your listening platform. And remember to like, subscribe, rate, and review the episode. A little goes a long way to help keep this podcast going. Have a great week, everyone, and talk to you soon.